Welcome to another episode of the MMA Lockcast. I'm your host, Manpreet, aka MMA Lock of the Night, your boy on social media at MMALOTN, and the architect behind the MMA Fight Archive, where we are slowly approaching 5,000 fighter profiles. Yes, 5,000 different fighters from all over the world, spanning 19 different promotions, all with direct links to past fights, so you can study up on these guys and know what to expect when they step foot inside the cage for all these upcoming MMA events. We are closing in on 120 subscribers as well on the service, and you can check it out with a 7-day free trial. Link to that in the description below. If you enjoy studying, breaking down, predicting fights, whether you're an analyst, capper, coach, fighter, anybody in the industry, and you want to ensure you're leaving no stone unturned, the MMA Fight Archive is exactly where you need to go to check it out. Again, 7-day free trial, your one-stop shop to ensure you can study up on as many fighters as possible and ensure you're getting as many direct links to past fights of those fighters. Once again, the MMA Fight Archive. All right, we are back for the UFC Saudi Arabia card this weekend, headlined by two middleweight matchups. In the main event, we got Israel Adesanya looking to buck the two-fight losing streak that he's currently on by taking on rising contender Nasruddin Imavov. Very fun matchup there, but even funner could potentially be the co-main event between Shara Magomedov and Michael Venom Page. Both guys with crafty striking techniques, different striking approaches as well. So it'll be interesting to see how that clash of styles will go down, and a bunch of other fun fights. We did lose about 2 fights over the last week or so. Andre Muniz versus Ikram Aliskerov is off, and as of today, just not even an hour or two ago, Abdul Karim Al-Sawadi and Balaji Oki are unable to compete this weekend. So we have 11 fights to cover for you guys for this UFC Saudi Arabia card. All right, let's quickly get into the quick lock of the night and dog of the night recaps for the last UFC event, which was UFC 311. And our lock of the night play with Grant Dawson came through with flying colors as he goes out there and dominates Diego Ferreira over the course of 15 minutes and wins that fight on the scorecards. Very happy with his performance there. The exact type of performance you expect from a guy like Grant Dawson to get his hand raised there as well. We ended up going 3-0 on other lock of the night plays as well, spanning the different regional promotions I've covered as well since that UFC 311 card, which now brings our yearly record to 4-2 coming out, the first weekend, I believe, of UFC or lock of the night predictions I made. We went 0-2, so to get 4 straight here, very happy about that. That now brings our hit rate to 67%. Again, the target is 75%, so it's still very early in the year, and we'll see if we can hit a couple more this weekend to try to bring that hit rate up. The dog of the night was originally supposed to be Beneil Dariush before Renato Moicano got the last minute call to step up, thus leaving Dariush without an opponent. So we switched our dog of the night play to Yuri Prochazka, who I got at plus 103 myself. I was able to cash on that there. I believe we also had a cash on one of our regional events as well, which now brings our dog of the night record to 3-3 on the year for a 50% hit rate. If you're hitting 50% on underdogs, that means you're profiting. So I'm very happy about that approach there as well. Just a reminder, all the best plays, best predictions, tracked plays, degenerate parlays, parlay party, all of that good stuff you can find on the MMALOTN Patreon page, where those guys are able to get these breakdowns first and foremost before you guys get it on this YouTube channel here. So make sure you guys check out the Patreon page, not just for the UFC, but for all the other great companies and promotions that I cover, including OKTAGON 66, which will be going down, I believe, the same time as this UFC Saudi Arabia card. So I'll have both of my screens on watching both events here and hopefully cashing tickets on both promotions. So look forward to some quick picks and track plays for OKTAGON 66 on the Lock of the Night Patreon page. Link in the description below. And lastly, shout out to my guys over there at GodzillaWins.com, providing your boy a platform to drop written content on a weekly basis so you guys can get it for free. Main event breakdowns normally come out on Thursdays, and the top 3 moneyline spots come out on Fridays. Make sure you guys check it out, GodzillaWins.com. They'll also have you covered for the big Super Bowl coming up in a few weeks here. Not to mention all the other team sports that you guys love to degen bet on. We got some solid analysts and cappers on there for you guys to tail and check out their analysis. Once again, that is GodzillaWins.com. All right, like I said, we got 11 fights to get through for this UFC Saudi Arabia card. Fun fights throughout, couple sneaky underdogs you might try to cash on. Let's see what we can get into. First fight of the night goes down in the heavyweight division as we have Hamdi Abdelwahab going up against Jamal Pogues. This is a pick'em fight with -110 coming in on both guys, and Hamdi Abdelwahab is going to be looking to return after nearly a 3-year-long layoff. I'd say closer to 2.5 years, but let's call it 3, as he defeated Dontel Mays in his UFC debut. I believe that was back at UFC 277, and that was a night where a lot of people were on either side thinking that Mays could expose the Abdelwahab game. He came in as an Olympic Greco-Roman wrestler, and he was pretty much beating up on tomato cans on the regional scene, going 3-0 before getting signed to the UFC. And then he went out there, landed a big shot in the first round to hurt Dontel Mays, lost the second round as Mays was able to start picking up some steam. And then Abdelwahab said, fuck it, let's get to the wrestling. And he was able to do that in the third round and grinding out Mays en route to a decision victory. Unfortunately, he tested positive for banned substances and even tampering with one of the substances, which earned him a 2-year suspension by the anti-doping agency that the UFC was with, I believe, USADA. So he was suspended for 2 years after that matchup, and now finally makes his return to the cage, hoping to pick up where he left off and hopefully actually getting an actual win. Like I said, big power punching, likes to go to the wrestling when he sees that opening as well. But I have a lot of question marks about his cardio, the long layoff that he's coming off of, not to mention what he might look like now that he's off the sauce, because that might be a completely different version than what we saw when he faced Dontel Mays. Now, he's going up against 29-year-old Jamal Pogues, who's coming off of a very solid and efficient victory over Thomas Petersen last year. He's been on the sidelines ever since, but he used an effective striking approach, utilizing a consistent jab, straight punches down the pipe, and really bloodying the face of Thomas Petersen, who fights later on in this card as well. But we saw Pogues do a great job in terms of sticking him at distance, utilizing a consistent striking approach, I believe landing close to 70 significant strikes over the course of 15 minutes, and showcasing that he can still go out there and have some solid performances even after that loss that he had to Mick Parkin previously. But Parkin was able to almost triple him up on strikes that night, and I think Pogues learned a good lesson and showcased that he learned that lesson in that matchup against Petersen. We've seen Pogues take grapple-heavy approaches as we've seen on the Contender Series or even when he fought Josh Parisian, but we've also seen him take striking-heavy approaches where he can stay consistent with that jab and landing consistently enough on his opponents to outdamage them, outpoint them, outwork them, and beat them on the scorecards. I had a little bit of an issue with his lack of urgency at times, but I believe at 29 years old and learning some of from the experiences that he's had in recent fights, we might be able to see him pick it up a little bit and actually look to go out there and try to make a mark in this heavyweight division. Now, he's going up against a very strong wrestler here in Abdelwahab, and Jamal Pogues' statistics for the UFC shows that he has a 77% takedown defense rate, although I don't know if any of those wrestlers were as good as what Abdelwahab will be bringing to the table. I do believe that Pogues, being the bigger guy here, should be able to stick Abdelwahab at distance, and I'm hoping that his continuous movement and jabs will continue to frustrate Abdelwahab, and that will cause him to make mistakes running into some counter strikes from Pogues. I'm going to lean Pogues here, not as confidently as I originally thought I would be in this spot, considering the takedown threat and if Pogues is unable to get off his back, but I think that Pogues can do a good enough job with his striking advantage here to really stick Abdelwahab, utilize that 4-inch height and 1-inch height advantage, 4-inch reach advantage, I should say, keeping him at range and really taking advantage of the ring rust that Abdelwahab may be dealing with coming into this matchup. So I'm going to go Pogues by decision. -110 is a fair line to take a shot on this spot as well. Another pickup matchup, and next up here in the featherweight division, as we have Bogdan Grad making his UFC debut, going up against Lucas Alexander. Now, starting off on the Grad side of things, he had a very hard-fought war against Michael Aswell back on the Contender Series this past season, where he was able to win by split decision and earn that UFC contract. I believe Dana said that he thought Michael Aswell actually ended up or should have deserved the win that night, but it was a very close fight. I believe, Grad was doing a great job in terms of controlling and dictating the pace there, exploding into a lot of his big shots, looking for takedowns. And even when he was unsuccessful in terms of landing those takedowns, he was still trying to create some offense off those takedown attempts to try to make it look good enough for the judges. And apparently it was enough on 2 of those scorecards. He's a BJJ black belt now, is very active off of his back in terms of swiveling his hips, looking for arm bars or reversal opportunities. But on the feet, again, very explosive with the power shots that he's able to land on his opponents. After his initial Contender Series loss to Tom Nolan at 155 pounds, he decided to drop down to featherweight, which seems to be a better weight class for him considering his stature. And obviously now with 3 straight wins to his record, it's going to show that he could be successful at this weight class. He's going up against Lucas Alexander, who took off the entirety of 2024 to deal with a knee injury, something that he had lingering going into his last matchup against Jeka Sergi in November of 2023, where he got knocked out in just over a minute and a half against a fighter that he was a minus 600 favorite against. It was a little bit of a mistake and minor lapse in judgment from Alexander as there's like a weird scrambling situation that Sergi capitalized on, land a big shot on Alexander, and eventually put him away there. Normally, Alexander is a very educated striker that utilizes a switch stance style, fights very well off of his back foot, has a good calf kicking and kicking game in general, and utilizes straight shots down the pipe very effectively. We saw him at his best when he picked up his lone UFC victory so far by defeating Steven Petersen over the course of 15 minutes. And I think we would have seen that against Jeka Sergi had he not had that little bit of a slip up. I think he can do that effectively here against Grad, who does have some finishing threat that Alexander will need to be wary about. And considering that Alexander is coming off a bit of a layoff here and that knee surgery and recovery, who knows if he has a little bit of a mental lapse again here that Grad might be able to take advantage of. I think Alexander has good enough grappling defense to fend off anything that Grad tries to do in that round, and I think that we'll see Alexander land the straighter, better shots down the pipe, even off of his back foot. I think he should be able to pick apart Grad here and go on to win a decision victory. But again, the layoff, the surgery, potential durability issues that might come back to haunt Alexander, that's a little bit too much of a worry for me here. So I'm going to go Alexander, very low confidence, but I do think he wins this matchup by decision. All right, going over to the women's flyweight division, we got Jasudavicius coming in at minus 230 as she goes up against former bantamweight title challenger Mayra Bueno Silva. Starting off on the Canadian side of things here, Jasudavicius currently finds herself on a 3-fight winning streak and finishing 2 of those matchups by submission in the 3rd round. In January, she was able to get that victory over Priscilla Cachoeira. I'm talking about January 2024 in front of her hometown crowd in Toronto. Then she was able to defeat short notice replacement Fatima Klein, who is obviously a high-level prospect, but unfortunately coming in on short notice and up a weight class against a physically stronger woman. Klein obviously came up short in that matchup. And then last time around, Jasudavicius pretty much utilized the entire first round to showcase some of her striking improvements, although she did come up short on that round for most judges. She ended up going back to her grappling in the 2nd round, and that's where she was able to dominate, get 2 10-8 scorecards from 2 different judges as well, but eventually leading to that 3rd round submission victory where she got right to work with her submission and was able to get that Darce choke finish. Jasudavicius, very strong grappler, and it seems like she's improving a lot and learning from the mistakes that she made in her losses to Natalia Silva as well as Tracy Cortez, 2 girls that were superior strikers and superior grapplers, respectively speaking. But Jasudavicius clearly doing what she needs to do to become a better fighter. In this instance, for this training camp, she actually moved over to Thailand and is really trying to round out her Muay Thai game because that is more of the weaker side of her game compared to the grappling, where we know she's already very effective and very dangerous to deal with when she gets that top position and is able to start raining down elbows and threatening with submissions. At 35 years old, she has to really start getting things done right now, and it's very good to see her be as active as she is, getting 4 fights in the span of 13 months. Now she's going up against former bantamweight title challenger Mayra Bueno Silva, who actually started her UFC career as a flyweight. She went 2-1, and after that loss to Manofiro, she decided to go up to 135 pounds and was able to put together 3 straight victories. I believe actually 4 straight victories until that Holly Holm fight was changed to a no contest after a positive drug test. But that didn't stop the UFC from throwing her into a vacant bantamweight title fight in the same card that Jasudavicius defeated Priscilla Cachoeira. And unfortunately, after gassing out after the first round against Pennington. We saw Pennington run away with that fight in the last 4 rounds to win that fight on the scorecards. Bueno Silva had a solid first round against Macy Chiasson last time around at UFC 303. Unfortunately, in the second round, she got taken down and cut very badly with a nasty elbow from Chiasson that caused a stoppage to that matchup. That is a type of cut that should stop a fight. So I know that Silva was very upset with the way the fight ended there, but you have to stop a fight considering how bad and deep that cut was. Bueno Silva is, in my opinion, a fighter that's more of a finish or bust type of fighter. 8 of her 10 wins have come by finish, with 3 of her 4 losses coming by decision, showcasing she really doesn't have the greatest minute-winning style. She's very good with looking for chokes, front chokes. She's very aggressive with her Muay Thai as well, but there has been times where she's a little bit lackadaisical with her approach, which allows her opponents to get better winning moments, minute-winning moments, so that they can go on and win decisions should the fights actually reach the scorecards. And in this matchup, that's going to be my concern once again with Silva. The odds are a little bit too wide for my liking because of the aggressiveness and recklessness that we've seen from Silva at times that might catch Jasudavicius off guard, that might even lead to a potential submission for the Brazilian fighter here. But I think that Jasudavicius has done a great job in terms of riding out her game. I think she's gone to Thailand for a reason, and we might see her try to show off some of those chops to disguise some of the takedown attempts that she'll be able to land afterwards. And I think from there, she should be able to do some good work from that top position. I think her submission defense is good enough to stay away from anything that Silva might be looking to throw up. And I think from there, we'll see Jasudavicius really grind this matchup out. So I do like Jasudavicius to win this fight on the scorecards. Her decision prop was minus 185, so that's obviously unbettable as well. But if we do get some Silva love closer to fight day here, I might consider Jasudavicius if she somehow gets around that minus 160, minus 150 mark. I don't see that happening. I think there's going to be enough love on the Canadian that it keeps this line up where it is. So yeah, I'll pick Jasudavicius, and I think she wins this fight on the scorecards, but you have to be concerned about the threat and the finishing threat that Bueno Silva normally brings to the table. All right. Moving over to the lightweight division, we got Terrence McKinney coming in at minus 470 as he welcomes back Damir Hadzovic, who comes in at plus 370. Now, starting off on the Terrence McKinney side, this guy is always must-watch television because he either goes out there and finishes his opponents really quickly, or he goes out on his shield like he did last time around in 37 seconds, being knocked out by Esteban Ribovics with one of the nastier head kicks we've ever seen in the octagon. Now, the crazy thing about Terrence McKinney is the record of fights that he has that have finished in the first round and have finished under 1.5 rounds as well. So, in his pro career, McKinney has 18 of his 22 fights that have finished in the first round. 21 of those 22 fights have finished under 1.5 rounds. All 9 of his UFC fights have finished under 1.5 rounds, with only 2 of those making it into the second round, which was obviously ended within half of that second round going through. Sorry, I lost my words there. His record now sits at 5-4 with him coming off that loss to Esteban Ribovics. Three of the 5 fighters that he's defeated so far are no longer in the UFC. The other 2 being Matt Frivola as well as Ziam, who fights later on in this card as well. He's very quick, very athletic, very powerful, especially with the head kicks when he's able to land those. But he's also very good in the grappling realm in terms of getting opponents down and quickly advancing to dominant positions where he's able to either get the back and sink in chokes or posture up and land some big ground and pound to try to get his opponents out of there. His issue has been his cardio and mismanaging it pretty much every single time out. Even in fights where he has grappling success, and if he's not able to get the finish, opponents are able to either get back to their feet or turn things around in the second round and quickly get him out of there because he's just so gassed and exhausted, which is crazy because it almost happens in every single matchup. So to trust him at minus 470 against anybody is always a big question mark, because if he can't get it done within 3 minutes, then you got to start worrying about that minus 500 that you're going to be laying on a fighter with as bad of a gas tank as McKinney has. Luckily for him, he's going up against Damir Hadzovic, who's been out of action for over 2 years now, nearly 2.5 years now. Dealing with a ton of issues, from injuries to visa issues. He's supposed to fight last February against Balaji Oki. That did not end up coming to fruition either. And now he's 38 years old. you got to wonder how he's going to look at this age, coming off those types of surgeries and recoveries. At his best, he is a guy that likes to go out there and utilize a barrage of strikes, combinations, good 1-2s down the pipe, very good with his footwork. But where he struggles is when guys utilize that grapple-heavy approach against him. We saw Mark Casey obviously stifle him on the ground. We saw the funny moment against Renato Moicano where Moicano got him to the ground immediately, took his back and submitted him. And then we saw Hadzovic so pissed off saying why, it was Moicano that got so pissed that the fight ended so quickly. And Hadzovic is like, you shouldn't have submitted me then. Like, just always weird things with Hadzovic. In terms of this matchup, McKinney should look to get this fight to the ground almost immediately. And I think from there, he'll eventually sink in a submission. If he can get that round one submission prop for McKinney at anything better than plus 150, I think it's worth a shot. Or just taking the chalk straight up on the under 1.5 at minus 225 or better, minus 250 or better, I think is worthy considering the record that I already laid out for McKinney here. It's violence. It's kill or be killed for McKinney at all times. And I think he has a willing dance partner with Hadzovic here who should be able to find that big shot and put him away if he ends up getting his hand raised. But my official prediction is going to be McKinney round one submission, but the under 1.5 is a must play in all Terrence McKinney fights. Like I said, up to minus 250. If you want to get crazy, minus 300, sure, but you can get it currently at minus 225 on BetOnline, and I would be all over that line. Let's go back up to the heavyweight division now for this next matchup as we have Shamil Gaziev coming in at minus 330 going up against Thomas Petersen, who comes in at plus 270. Now, Gaziev was able to get back in the win column last time around as he put Dontel Mays through the ringer, pushing him up against the cage, landing his takedowns, and doing what Gaziev does best, which is normally finishing opponents early. But if he's not able to, he gets to his wrestling and he's able to keep guys in bad positions and pretty much wear on them. Now, in the matchup prior to that against Jairzinho Rozenstruik, it was Gaziev's first UFC main event slot. And after not being able to get to much of an effective wrestling game early, we saw him slow down and falter to the power striking game of Rozenstruik, who was able to force Gaziev to quit on the stool after round 4. Now, people are going to say, hey, Gaziev probably improved his cardio considering the type of performance he had against Dontel Mays. But the key thing to hone in on there is the fact that he was able to get to positions where he was able to catch his breath and find some rest. And that's with him getting these takedowns, controlling positions, keeping guys on their back or up against the cage. And that's where he's able to really start getting those big, deep breaths in and ensure that his cardio can go 15 minutes if he needs to. It's when he's unable to do that and when he's getting punched in the face and when he's stressing out from the fact that he's forced to strike in a position where he doesn't really feel all that comfortable. So if he goes up against guys that can stifle his wrestling or not stay pinned up against the cage, that's where we'll see him start to struggle and have to lean on that power striking approach, where if he's unable to land those big shots, that causes him to gas out even quicker. Now, he's a guy that I've been big on in the past. I even had him pretty big against Rozenstruik, but I was impressed with the takedown defense from Rozenstruik and his ability to just keep Gaziev at distance. And if he fights somebody similar to that who can stifle his wrestling, that's where Gaziev could potentially find himself in trouble. And unfortunately for him, I think he's fighting somebody this weekend that could potentially provide that type of trouble. Now, Thomas Petersen came up short against Jamal Pogues in his UFC debut as he was unable to get to his wrestling and was forced to fight against a guy that is a superior striker. And even in that, we saw Petersen go 15 minutes and only land about 10 or 15 strikes less than Pogues, but it was obvious that Pogues was the one landing with more conviction, landing with a little bit more damage, and even blooding the face of Petersen. But Petersen was able to bounce back in his next matchup where he didn't even have to rely on his wrestling all that much, where he was able to walk down Usman and land some straight jabs down the pipe and stay very consistent with the offense that he was bringing to the table. Petersen, coming into the UFC, was originally known as just a wrestler, and that's where he showcased throughout his LFA career. But after the loss to Jamal Pogues, I think he realized that he needs to start trusting his hands a little bit more, and I think we saw those improvements in his fight against Mohammed Usman. Now, in this matchup against Gaziev, I think Petersen has the wrestling that he could potentially either keep this fight upright or at least work back to his feet and keep Gaziev in a position where he's forced to strike against Petersen. Obviously, Gaziev probably has a little bit more power, and he can probably land big enough shots on Petersen, but if Petersen can keep the pressure high, the pace high, and the output high, that could cause Gaziev a lot of stress and some issues, which will force him to slow down, similar to what we saw in the Rozenstruik fight. Yes, Petersen is not the type of striker that Rozenstruik is, but his pace and ability to keep a high level of output could cause Gaziev some stress. So for me, it's more so hoping that Petersen's defensive grappling is as good as I remember it is, and from what I've seen on the on tape. And I think that should be enough for him to really wear down Gaziev, keep this fight in the stand-up realm. And as long as the urgency is high in terms of getting up as soon as he gets taken down or working off the cage if Gaziev wants to keep him there, then he should be able to keep a type of pace that Gaziev is not all comfortable with. And we could see Petersen's cardio advantage really start to pull away in this matchup as well. So when I originally studied this, we saw Petersen up at plus 300. Obviously, he's taking a little bit of action now, coming down to that plus 270 range. I think he has the chops to pull off the upset here. It's just going to come down to his urgency and his wrestling being as good as I remember it being here. So give me Petersen by decision. I think Petersen by decision is around that plus 700 range as well. So if you want to take a little bit of a sprinkle on that, I wouldn't be against that either. But I think he pulls off the upset here. We have to remember Gaziev stresses out in the striking if he can't have his way or find moments to catch his breath. And Petersen is more than likely able to cause him that stress and keep this in the striking realm. So give me Petersen by decision. All right, next up, Naimov coming in at minus 300, going up against Ofli, who comes in at plus 250 in this featherweight matchup. Now, Naimov is a guy that was consistently fading throughout his UFC career, but he always had these small bounces go his way. His fight against Jamie Mullarkey, he was getting beat up for about a round and a half before he ended up landing that big shot to put Mullarkey away. Credit to him for catching him. The Nathaniel Wood fight, I believe I had Wood as my lock of the night play that night, but Naimov got away with so many goddamn fouls in that fight and didn't get any points taken away that it was very, very unfortunate. From French grabs to grabbing the inside of the glove of Wood, who was, pretty much getting a fight-ending sequence going at the ending of that fight. That allowed Naimov to survive and eventually get his hand raised on the scorecards. And then his last win against Eric Silva, injuring his knee 30 seconds into that matchup, and Naimov was able to get the win there. But then he went up against Philippe Lima, who's coming in on short notice, up a weight class, making his UFC debut. And that fight was pretty much split on every single scorecard going into the third round. And that's where we saw Lima take advantage of the cardio advantage that he had in that fight, taking advantage of a bad scramble attempt that Naimov tried to initiate. That ended up allowing Lima to get to his back, sink in that rear naked choke, and force a submission. Naimov is a power punching wrestler that likes to get opponents to the ground and grind them out, or dictate the pace with his striking and try to land these big shots to try to get them out of there. Trains in Denver, Colorado, alongside the likes of Justin Gaethje and Kamaru Usman and those guys. Solid training camp, solid regional experience as well, but I don't know if he's worth a minus 300 shot. Luckily for him, he's going up against a guy in Ofli who's kind of the same fighter in a way, but obviously Naimov has a much better strength of schedule. Ofli is coming off the most recent season of The Ultimate Fighter where he made it to the finale, but ended up coming up short against the eventual winner, Myron Santos, who was able to stop the takedowns of Ofli and batter him on the feet, eventually finishing him in the second round of that fight. Ofli is a BJJ black belt who was born, is of Turkish descent, grew up in Australia, opened a gym in Bali, if I'm not mistaken, but seems to have gone back down to Australia to train for this camp at the Absolute Combat Academy, I believe they're called, or Combat Club, where he was able to get some rounds in with Israel Adesanya and all the other guys that are training down there as well. He's a solid all-around fighter, but I think some of his shortcomings in the striking realm could cause him some issues. I think Naimov might be able to land some big shots. He might have a strength advantage here as well, which might see this fight take place, more so jockeying for position, and then eventually Naimov kind of dictating the pace with his power. But minus 300 is not a line I want to tie myself to with a guy like Naimov, who could fumble the bag here, right? Ofli might have a little bit of a cardio advantage here where he might be able to pull away later on in this matchup, land some big shots of his own, or even find a submission if he's able to get the club and sub opportunity. So my prediction is going to be Naimov here, but I just can't trust him at this number. I still have more that I'd like to learn about Ofli in terms of fighting guys of the level of Naimov, because most of his career has been fighting some very mediocre competition. But this will be one of his harder fights in terms of fighting a guy that's going to provide as much resistance as Naimov is. So I'll go Naimov by decision, but not a fight that I want to be invested in all that much. All right, next up, lightweight banger here, as we have Fares Ziam coming in at plus 120, going up against Mike Davis, who comes in at minus 140. We'll start off on the Ziam side of things, who's currently riding a 4-fight winning streak after dropping a submission loss to Terrence McKinney. But Ziam's been looking good, better and better every single time out. He's 27 years old. He's growing into his body. He's becoming a little bit stronger. He's landing with a little bit more oomph with his strikes, which is kind of the realm that he chooses to operate and feels most comfortable in. Last time around, shutting down most of the grappling approach from Frivola, lighting him up on the feet, and eventually finishing him in the third round in front of his hometown Paris crowd. Ziam, again, becoming very good, very comfortable in the kickboxing realm, improving the defensive grappling. But I believe that there are still some holes that a better grappler and better wrestler overall would be able to expose compared to what he went up against Matt Frivola last time around. Let's not forget, he's only 2 fights removed from defeating Claudio Pogues by split decision, and we know Pogues not the greatest fighter. So if a superior grappler can get him into those positions, he might struggle. And I think Frivola was struggling with closing the distance and getting to positions in the grappling realm with, before kind of tiring himself out a little bit. And then once Frivola was forced to strike with Ziam, not really all that comfortable there and was getting teed off on, and eventually ended up losing that fight by knockout. Again, Ziam, impressive. I'm very intrigued by the type of improvements that he's been making, but this weekend is going to be a big test for him to see whether he's really climbed that mountain or gotten over that hump that will get him to the next level, because he's going up against a very underrated lightweight here in Mike Davis. Now, Mike Davis is on a 4-fight winning streak that stretches all the way back to 2019. He's had a myriad of injuries to deal with, from knee surgeries to shoulder issues to bicep issues, which actually got him out of his last matchup where he was scheduled to fight Drew Dober last year. And now he's hoping that 2025 will be his year that he can actually, launch himself into the next level, get into the rankings, and really showcase that he's one of the best lightweights on the planet. I believe he's capable of that. His wrestling is high level. He's very much rounded out his jiu-jitsu game, as we saw in his last fight against Natan Levy, consistently getting the back of Levy and eventually getting that submission in the second round. His control is high level. His wrestling, I've already talked about his wrestling, very good. His striking, very good as well, very educated, a lot of power, a lot of athleticism, great cardio as well, has a solid strength of schedule for the majority of his career, and he's really dialed in. This guy's a very smart and intelligent fighter, and he knows exactly what he needs to do to end up getting his hand raised against some of these tougher guys that he's going against. Ziam is going to be a tough striking code to crack, where I think Davis has good enough striking to deal with him there, but eventually open up those takedown opportunities where you'll be able to get dominant positions and eventually open up a submission opportunity for himself. So I do like Davis to go out there, get this fight to the ground relatively quickly, get that grind going, and then eventually get the back of Ziam and sink in a rear naked choke. I really like Davis in the spot, and I think he makes it look quite easy. So to get him around that minus 450 line, I think is a bit of a blessing here, and we should take full advantage of it while we can. All right, next up, bantamweights going at it here, as we have Said Nurmagomedov coming in at minus 170, going up against Vinicius Lock Dog Oliveira, who comes in at plus 140. Now, starting off on the Nurmagomedov side, who hasn't seen action for a little bit now. I believe it was October 2023, where he quickly submitted Muin Gafarov, but unfortunately has had 3 scheduled fights in 2024 that he was forced to pull out of, and now he fights this weekend in front of a pro Nurmagomedov crowd. Nurmagomedov is a guy with a very impressive 18-3 record, very dangerous with that front choke, as Gafarov obviously and Cody Stamann were finding out. Very dangerous with the striking approach as well. But my issue with him in the past has been his lack of urgency and unwillingness to throw with more output and volume. That, in my opinion, is what cost him against Jonathan Martinez, who was able to defeat him by split decision that night. And I think that's kind of what's going to haunt Nurmagomedov throughout his career, unless he shows a little bit more aggressiveness or urgency to really pull himself away from some of these fights that end up being a lot closer than they should be. Even his UFC debut against Jared Scoggins, or I believe it was Jared Scoggins, back in the day, controversial decision that he ended up winning. But again, a lot of these fights being closer than they should be because he just doesn't pull the trigger enough. He is dangerous when he pulls the trigger or when he finally gets his grappling going and finds his submissions. But if he doesn't have the aggressiveness, that's where things start to get a little bit shaky for him. And that's why it's tough to trust him as a favorite. He's going up against a guy that's very aggressive in Vinicius Oliveira, which might bring out the aggressiveness in turn for Nurmagomedov, having a guy that's willing to engage with him as much as we're going going to be expecting Oliveira to do so. Last time around, Oliveira pulled off an upset victory as a plus 200 underdog against former ranked bantamweight contender Ricky Simón, who could not get his wrestling going at all. Oliveira did a great job in terms of utilizing his footwork and range management to keep Simón at distance, battering him from range with combinations and with a lot of kicks, almost injuring himself in the second round as Ricky Simón checked a beautiful leg kick there, but Oliveira managed to get his wits back about him in the third round and continued the onslaught, and I believe he ended up winning that fight on all three judges' scorecards, 30-27. Maybe one of them gave the second round to Ricky Simón, if I'm not mistaken, but Oliveira looked the best we've ever seen him through his 24-fight career that night against Ricky Simón. He's definitely a guy at 29 years old to keep an eye on with his aggressiveness and the way he just creates wars and chaos and the way that he thrives in it. And he might be able to do that here against Said Nurmagomedov. My issue is fading a Nurmagomedov, right? Said is very, very dangerous, and he can definitely take advantage of some of the holes that Oliveira might leave in his game with how reckless he is at times. But if Oliveira can stay safe at range, do what he did to Ricky Simón in terms of the just staying long, staying rangy, staying very privy to the fact that Nurmagomedov might change levels and look to get this to the ground to try to nullify and contain the awkward style of Oliveira. If Oliveira can maintain that range and showcase what he did in the Ricky Simón fight, he has an opportunity to pull off the upside here at plus 140. But again, that line's just not enough for me to really budge in this spot. I will pick Oliveira to win this fight because I like his output and his volume, but I just can't fade him at that plus 140 number. I can't fade Nurmagomedov with that line. If this line starts to get wider, then I might have to consider it. But at this current line, I'm just going to predict Oliveira to win by decision. Likely won't bet it. This will be more of a pass more than anything for me, but I'm going to go Oliveira to win on the scorecards. All right. The third heavyweight fight is up next year as we have Sergey Pavlovich coming in at minus 305 going up against Jairzinho Rozenstruik, who comes in at plus 255. Now starting off on the Pavlovich side, who finds himself on a 2-fight losing streak now, first getting knocked out by Tom Aspinall in November 2023 when they fought for the interim title. Aspinall's speed and power ended up paying dividends that night, knocking out Sergey Pavlovich and stopping that, I believe, 6-fight winning streak that he had in the UFC, stopping all of those opponents in the first round. That was followed up by a fight against Alexander Volkov, where Volkov was able to keep Pavlovich at range, utilizing good footwork and his reach and height advantage, keeping Pavlovich at range, good footwork, good movement, good volume, and staying away from the big power that we know Pavlovich has, which is how he's been able to put out all of his UFC victories. If Pavlovich can't get that knockout, then things start to get a little bit iffy for him. He showcased a little bit more of a defensive approach and a little bit more a methodical approach on the regional scene before coming to the UFC, but once he found that he has this ungodly power, that's where you started to see him get a little bit more aggressive, crashing the pocket a little bit more recklessly and looking to land those big strikes to put opponents out. But if he's not able to do so, things could get a little bit shaky, and that might come to fruition here against Jairzinho Rozenstruik, who, in my opinion, is a superior technical striker and might be able to take advantage of some of the chaotic type of blitz attacks that we see from Pavlovich. Now, last time for Rozenstruik, we saw him go out there and batter Tai Tuivasa over the course of 15 minutes and win that fight on the scorecards. Now, if you guys remember, it was a split decision because one moronic judge, gave all 3 rounds to Tai Tuivasa, which made absolutely no sense, as Rozenstruik did a great job in terms of just battering him from distance, utilizing a slick jab, consistent jab, good leg kicks as well, and just put on a class act, in my opinion, in terms of a clinic against Tuivasa that night. That was on the back end of that main event victory he had over Shamil Gaziev early in 2024. And we are starting to see Rozenstruik build a little bit of momentum here, winning 2 fights for the first time since, I believe, he joining the UFC in 2019. If Rozenstruik can utilize the superior striking approach here, he might be able to counter Pavlovich effectively, might even be able to put Pavlovich out cold. But if he can just stick that jab out there, see the shots that are coming his way from Pavlovich, he should be able to stay safe enough to really cause Pavlovich a lot of issues. Obviously, the one fight that we can kind of compare this to for Rozenstruik is when Rozenstruik went up against Francis Ngannou. Ngannou just reckless abandon, throwing wild strikes, bull rushing Rozenstruik, was able to put him away. Pavlovich might be able to do the same thing, but to bet him at minus 305 for that to happen, I think is just, it's not smart, in my opinion. Either taking Pavlovich straight up by knockout, round one knockout, probably the best way to get the best bang for your buck there, backing a chalky favorite like Pavlovich. But I'm going to go out on a limb here. I'm going to go with Rozenstruik. I think we see him put on a better striking performance, really touch up Pavlovich, bust his nose up, stick with that jab, showcase good striking defense here as well, and hopefully avoid the majority of those shots coming back his way. And from there, just bloody the nose, bloody the face of Pavlovich, and win this fight on the scorecards, or even countering him and landing a big knockout as well. So I'm going to go against the grain here. I'm going to go Rozenstruik by decision. Hopefully it ends up being an entertaining striking clinic for Rozenstruik. Now moving over to the co-main event, where we have a spectacular middleweight clash between Shara and Magomedov, coming in as a minus 195 favorite, going up against Michael Venom Page, who comes in at plus 170. Now, Magomedov obviously 15-0. I believe he is now 4-0 in the UFC, coming off that spectacular double spinning back fist knockout over Armen Petrosyan. Very, very fun fight there, and eventually him getting that double back fist knockout was probably one of the best knockouts that we saw in 2024 inside the octagon. We know what Magomedov's game is. He is a Muay Thai specialist, likes to utilize a lot of kicks, likes to utilize a lot of movement, some in and out shots. Has a horrible defensive grappling game, but luckily for him, the UFC is on his side and trying to give him favorable stylistic matchups so that he can make it as far in the middleweight division as possible, so they can kind of capitalize on the aura that he brings to the table and the intrigue that he brings from the MMA fan base. Again, Bruno Silva, striker, Antonio Tricoli, BJJ specialist, but really shitty, sucks, as we saw in that fight. Mihailo Oleksiejczuk, striker, Armen Petrosyan, striker, Michael Venom Page, striker. Now it's just going to come down to if he can be effective against all these different types of strikers that the UFC is throwing at him, especially with this weird matchup that he has against Michael Page this weekend. Good knockout power, decent cardio, very entertaining, unorthodox striking approach. Very difficult for a lot of fighters to really figure that out. Talking about the last fight against Petrosyan, he was lighting Petrosyan up in that first round, but it seemed like the leg kicking game of Petrosyan was starting to catch up to Magomedov and really frustrate Magomedov in that second round until he eventually landed that spinning back fist, double spinning back fist, I should say, which led to the end of the fight there. Now he's going up against Michael Venom Page, who is now 1-1 in the UFC, and I am proud to say I am 2-0 betting Michael Venom Page fights in the UFC. In the first fight, he came in as an underdog against Kevin Holland, and I knew he would be the superior striker there, and he was able to do that very well against Holland, ended up beating him to the punch and winning that fight on the scorecards. And then the Ian Machado-Gary fight. A lot of people who had only followed Gary in the UFC thought that he was just a striker, but he does have a grappling game, which he did utilize effectively in round one, was unable to get to it in round two, and then for the life of him was clinging on to the back of Michael Venom Page in the third round to squeeze out that decision victory. So even though I was very confident in Gary going into that matchup, Page made it much closer than I expected it to be, and he still ended up losing that fight, but still something that we could give him credit for in terms of showcasing better defensive and resistance than we expected him to do against a guy that was taking a grapple-heavy approach. But that's not what he's going to have to worry about this weekend going up against a striker like Magomedov. Yes, Magomedov, you would expect wrestling, but he doesn't have a wrestling game. He is more of a striker, and knowing the type of ego and confidence he has, he's going to want to go out there and try to outstrike the technical and calculated striking approach of MVP, which is why I'm liking Page in the spot. You give me another striker, a guy that I know is not going to go out there and wrestle against Michael Venom Page, I will take Page any day as an underdog. He still has a spectacular 22-3 record. His only losses, that knockout loss to Douglas Lima earlier in his career, the decision loss against wrestler Logan Storley, a very close fight where he showcased some solid grappling regardless, and then obviously the Ian Machado-Gary fight that he lost by the slimmest of margins. But going in a complete striking battle, Michael Venom Page is one of the harder guys to deal with because of his speed, because of his footwork, his in and out movement, his straight shots down the pipe. I think that's going to catch Magomedov off guard. I think we'll see Page do a great job in terms of touching up Magomedov, maybe landing a couple knockdowns as well. really setting traps that Magomedov has not seen in the past before. That's going to cause him a lot of trouble. So I think it's a no-brainer to take Page here as an underdog. Plus 170 is kind of what he's been hovering around over the last couple of days. I'm interested to see how that line moves, whether it rises or drops coming closer to fight time. But at plus 170, this is a no-brainer shot, in my opinion, for the guy that is the technically better striker and has the type of striking that could cause a guy like Magomedov some issues here. So in what I expect to be purely a striking battle, MVP comes out on top by decision. And I wish we would have gotten 5 rounds of it, but it looks like it's only going to be a 3-rounder. All right, a fight that we will get 5 rounds for is the main event, which also goes down in the middleweight division, as we have former middleweight champion Israel Adesanya coming in at minus 155, going up against Nasruddin Imavov, who comes in at plus 135. Now, starting off on the Adesanya side, who is on a 2-fight losing streak for the first time in his professional mixed martial arts career. Last time around being submitted by Dricus du Plessis, a fight where he said he had a mental lapse, ended up allowing du Plessis to land a big shot, get the back, and quickly get the tap. And I think that's a little bit of a wake-up call for Adesanya here, showing that he really needs to lock in. He's still capable of high-level performances at 35 years old. He's talked a lot about now not chasing the belt or having the belt or anything like that. That gives him a bit of ease on his mind, not as stressing as much, to go out there and have a little bit more fun, and that could produce even better performance from the Nigerian fighter. Adesanya, very slick with his striking, good leg kicks, great ability to set up traps and spring them on his opponents. But I really think the unorthodox striking style and fighting style of guys like Sean Strickland and Dricus du Plessis kind of overwhelmed his circuits in a bit. Like, it really caused him some issues in terms of trying to get off on guys that were not as traditional as prior opponents that he had fought, like the Alex Pereiras and the Jared Cannoniers, guys that were not as unorthodox. We know Sean Strickland's weird style of just constant pressure, constant pace, the front kick up the middle, the Philly shell kind of rolling that caused Adesanya some issues. And then du Plessis, we know he is the best, shittiest fighter in the world, if you guys know what I mean. And most people watching this video will know what I mean in that instance. And not to mention the power that du Plessis brings to the table as well. But Adesanya, I think he's still capable of high-level performances. And I think he'll be able to showcase that this weekend against Frenchman Nasruddin Imavov. Now, Imavov is on a 3-fight winning streak. Should technically be 4-fight winning streak. Had that Chris Curtis fight not been stopped due to a accidental headbutt, I believe it was. But it seemed like the momentum was clearly in Imavov's favor. Imavov, very slick striker. It's clear his grappling is improving as well, especially from what he saw in his last matchup, which was a co-main event against Brendan Allen. Pretty much won that fight entirely, being the superior striker and really landing much more damage than Allen. I believe he won that fight 2-1, if I'm not mistaken. But Imavov, traditional kickboxer, good combinations, good leg kicks, good knees, good elbows. Like I said, improving his grappling defense. Much better fighter than when he came into the UFC back in 2020 and had that very awful performance against Jordan Williams. Clearly improving. We got to give him credit for that. But I think he's going to meet his match here against a guy in Adesanya, who is the superior striker. And this is the type of striker that I think Adesanya will thrive against. A guy that's a little bit more traditional. As long as Imavov doesn't have this vastly improved grappling game that we don't know about. It's clearly he's improved it, but to the point that he can use it offensively to put Adesanya in bad positions, I just don't see that happening. I think we'll see Adesanya showcase good enough takedown defense. Should Imavov look for some grappling here, but eventually this fight mainly taking place in the striking realm, I think we'll see Adesanya really start tuning up Imavov, touching him up on the feet, landing his leg kicks, landing his combinations, setting his traps, springing them, doing what Adesanya does. I'm assuming that we see a classic Adesanya performance here. So I'm going to go Izzy by decision. I think he bucks this losing trend. And I think he goes out there and continues fighting other fights that give him a little bit more fire. Maybe not to chase the title, but maybe headline some of these fight night cards. Maybe get a 5-round co-main event on a pay-per-view or something like that. But there are still some fun fights for Adesanya out there. But I think he starts getting back into the win column this weekend with a decision victory over the Frenchman Nasruddin Imavov. So once again, we'll go Israel Adesanya by decision to get him at minus 155 as well. I think that's a steal of a line. We got to take advantage of that. Hopefully I'm right about this. All right, there you guys go. Full card breakdown for UFC Saudi Arabia. Remember, this is going to be an early start time. Let me quickly confirm the start time for it. But since it is in Saudi Arabia, it will be much earlier than we're used to seeing. It will be early prelims start at 9 a.m. Eastern time on Saturday, with the main card starting at 12 p.m. Eastern. Love it. Coffee and combat, nothing better than that. And then you have the rest of the day to actually be a human being and have a social life. There you guys go. And reminder, OKTAGON 66 going down as well. I'll have written breakdowns and track plays for that card on the Lock of the Night Patreon page. Check the link in the description below. I'll be back later this week for all the other great content that you guys normally see for UFC cards. I'll see you back on the channel tomorrow. Peace.
Last thing.